That's the first time I saw my picture on that screen. I feel like I should apologize for that. That was like a really cruel thing. Hey, I do want to take 60 seconds and double down on something that Lauren mentioned that we say every week around here, and that is when you give to ACC, you give through ACC. And I want to just celebrate 3 like crazy tangible ways that happened since the last time we met. Last Sunday night, our middle school and high school students got together in this room. They stacked this whole area of chairs against the wall, and they had something that they called a fancy party. It looked like this. It was like fancy, like a Applebee's on a date night, and yeah. So, but hey, let me tell you what you did. Because you give every week to ACC, you provided just an awesome, laid-back opportunity for middle school and high school students. There was about 100 of them to gather in this room for them to be able to bring their friends and to introduce them to what Daniel and his fantastic team is doing on Sunday night. So I want to say thank you for that. This weekend, many of the ladies in the house today, you gathered for the IF gathering. And there's a few people who were excited about that. It looked like this. Look at all those ladies, and think of all us dads who had all those kids all to ourselves. Yes, the ladies gathered, and IF gathering was a fantastic thing, and to say thank you to our wonderful ladies ministry team for hosting that. And then Lauren mentioned in the video about our connection in Ukraine. Communitas International Church. The name was slipping my mind at the moment. We have connection there through Adam and Alexis Long, who are members of ACC, who are stationed in Warsaw, Poland. Their church is housing refugees from Ukraine. And because you give, we were able to go ahead and send over a gift to them to help. Alexis sent a few pictures. It looks like this of what they're doing. I told the first service, these pictures aren't sexy, but they are real. This is what's going on, and you are helping to make that happen. And as Lauren also mentioned, that's something to celebrate. As Lauren also mentioned, if you want to be a part of that, we're going to continue to send over financial gifts. You can do that through our AND Initiative tab. And if that sounds crazy to you, go to Kitchen Table today. They'll explain AND Initiative tab, or if you write a check, if you just write AND Initiative or Ukraine in the memo portion, everything is going to go that direction. Hey, got a question for you. I need you to help me fill in this blank, okay? Desperate times call for desperate measures, or Netflix. But desperate times call for desperate measures. I was driving to church this past Tuesday. Let me back up to say, I was driving to work this past Tuesday, and I was on Calabria Road getting ready to turn left onto old FM 471. It sounds scary, but I was in this long line of cars, and there was a school bus that was in front of me. Now, if you live in this area, you don't have to close your eyes to imagine a long line of cars on Calabria Road. But for the rest of you, I'm telling you, it's a real deal. So I'm there's a school bus in front of me, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye what appeared to be like a high school student who's running on the sidewalk along Calabria across from me. At first I thought this guy's he's just late for school, but then once he got about parallel with the school bus driver, I realized he had just missed his bus to school, because he's standing on the sidewalk and he starts doing this thing, like trying to get the attention of the bus driver. And after what must have been some small measure of success, he switched hand motions and started doing this, like, open the door. Can you open the door? Well, I knew this guy's having a really bad day, because about that time, the line of cars, they move forward. So the school bus moves up, but this guy will not be deterred. He's running to catch up with the bus. Once again, at this point, it's like a movie that I want to know, like, what's going to happen here. So when he catches up to the bus driver, he goes into praying hands, and I can read his lips saying, please open the door. When the door still didn't open, he gets on his knees. True story. When I thought to take a picture of it, it was the moment had passed. He's on his knees on the sidewalk on the side of Calabria Road. The bus is in the far left-hand lane. He's 2 lanes over. This was going to be like a game of Frogger if the doors did open. He's on his knees begging, please, please open the door. And for as moving as that was, I mean, for those of us watching it, you could almost hear Sarah McLachlan in the background singing, "In the Arms of an Angel." But for as moving as it was, and as soon as the traffic cleared the cross traffic, the bus turned left and left this young man on his knees, just desperate for how he was gonna get to school that day. Now, we all know what that's like, right? I mean, for us, it's not on our knees begging a school bus driver on the side of Calabria Road, but we've all been in moments, we've all had seasons of life where life forced us into this place of just being desperately desperate. I sat around a table this past week in our community group, and I listened as a daughter talked about her dad's cancer diagnosis and how he had made a decision that he was not going to undergo any kind of treatment. And she was devastated. She was desperate. Around that same table, there was another individual who is dealing with a chronic illness and just talked about how every day they wake up with some measure of pain. And at first it felt like a season, but now they're wondering, is this ever gonna go away? And they were trying to be hopeful, but you could sense the desperation in their voice. I had lunch this week with a dad who recently went through a divorce, and he told me about a pretty serious situation that involved the safety of his kids. And he's done everything he knows to do, and yet at the same time, he feels completely powerless to fix it. He's desperate. He's desperate. And you know what? If we had time, you could tell your story too. I mean, just like you. I turn on the TV every night, and I see the devastation of what's happening in Ukraine, the blurred out images of bodies laying on the street. I hear the cries of moms and dads and Ukrainian citizens asking for help. People who are not just desperate, but they would tell you that they are, at this point, they are desperately desperate. And sometimes our desperation, it's kind of centered around like goods and goals, stuff we need, stuff we want. We want the invasion to stop. We want the pain to go away. We need the finances to come in. We need the diagnosis to change. We need a cure to be made evident. Sometimes it's about goods and goals. And sometimes it's about God. We need to know that He's still with us. We need to know that our circumstances aren't indicative of His level of love and concern for us in the moment. We need to understand that He hasn't thrown in the towel on us like maybe the hurt and the frustration and the exhaustion of trying to figure out life has caused us to want to throw in the towel on Him. Sometimes desperation is about goods and goals. Sometimes it's about God. But a lot of the time, it's about both. Today, as we continue our series, Jesus Stories, Mark is going to lead us to a story about Jesus that I think captures all that emotion I just described. If you have a Bible, want to pull one up on your phone or tablet and follow along today, you can do that in the Gospel of Luke. Luke chapter 8 is where we're going to be, and while you are making your way there, let me give you the big idea for today's message. And that is this: in our desperation, sometimes God calms the storm around us, and sometimes He simply calms the storm within us. In our desperation, sometimes God calms the storm around us. Like the circumstances, they change. The thing you've been praying for, it seems like finally there's an answer. Sometimes He calms the storm around us. But sometimes He simply calms the storm within us. Let's look at this together. Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 22, Luke records this for us. He says, "One day, Jesus said to His disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side of the lake.' So they got into a boat and set out, and as they sailed, He, Jesus, fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke Him, saying, 'Master, Master, we're going to drown.' He got up, rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm." Verse 25, "Where is your faith?" he asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they ask one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." Luke tells us about this day. Mark in his gospel tells us it was in fact an evening where Jesus got in the boat with his disciples to sail to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And we can assume, and I think safely assume, that by the little detail that Luke gives us when it comes to this story, that the first part of this trip went off without a hitch. It was predictably predictable, especially given the fact that many of the guys on board that ship, among them were some professional fishermen who had spent virtually every day of their life on this very body of water. So in the beginning, all was calm and all was bright, so much so that Jesus went to sleep. Mark, who gives us a few more details about this night, he tells us that Jesus was in the stern of the boat, asleep on a cushion when things begin to change, when a storm began to brew. Now, for us, it's sometimes hard to imagine, like, okay, this was like an all of a sudden kind of thing, but I want you to take a look. This is a picture of the Sea of Galilee, and you can see the Sea of Galilee sits some 700 feet below sea level, and it's surrounded by mountains. And so when wind blows over the mountains, it has this bowl effect where it can get really, really bad, really, really quick. And on this night, for the disciples, it may have been as bad as they had ever seen it. In verse 23, Luke refers to this storm as a squall, this sudden gust of wind that comes along with some very heavy rain. When Matthew writes about this night, he says that it came up on them without any warning at all. Another writer, when he talked about it, he described it like this. He said, "The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If it weren't for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost." I'm just seeing if you're still paying attention. If you're under 40, you'll have to Google Gilligan's Island theme song just to be able to get that one. Here are the disciples. And in that moment, the security and the predictability of what they knew, of what was supposed to happen, was met with all the uncertainty and all the unpredictability of what was actually happening around them. They were fearful for their life. And at this point in the story, the scene, it feels pretty desperate. Their boat is taking on more water than they can realistically bail out. And so they wake Jesus up. Luke says, he said, Master, we're gonna drown. And in an amazing story, it sounds like something straight from flannel graph in Sunday school. Jesus gets up and he rebukes the wind and the waves and the storm. It calms. In fact, the only piece of the storm that's left is among the disciples as they're looking at each other and saying, "Who is this man that even the wind and the waves, they obey?" Now, I realize for a lot of us, we look at this story, and for as amazing as it is, there's nothing new here. This is the same story we heard about as kids, and like so many of the other stories we heard about as kids, this one, we sometimes have some difficulty translating it into adulthood. And it's not about whether or not the story is true. It's more about the experiences of our life in light of this truth. It's like we see what Jesus did this night in a very literal way, in the middle of a very literal storm. And we look around at all of our figurative storms and we say, really, like you can't do anything. I mean, the end result of their story, according to Luke in verse 24, was that all was calm. And yet our story, it still feels like it's filled with calamity. They get amazement. In ours, it's amazement of a completely different kind. If Jesus, the Son of God, did in fact do this, then why? Why would he not do the same for us? With the time I have left, I want to give you two truths about desperation that I think this text just highlights and brings front and center. I want to give you two truths, two things that I think can be helpful, especially in these seasons when we find ourselves working, going against the current, trying to be hopeful. The first one is this: desperation often discloses what we disguise. Desperation often discloses the very things that we would rather disguise. Now think about it. Here are the disciples. They're in the boat. They're in fear of their very lives. Luke says that, again, they go to Jesus and they say, Master, we're gonna drown. Sounds like a very simple, a very sombering announcement. But Mark, when Mark talks about this storm, Mark, who we believe got his information firsthand from Peter, who was there in the boat that night, Mark says that they woke Jesus up by saying, Teacher, don't you care that we drown? Don't you care? Not an announcement, but with a question. It feels a lot more like an indictment. And I'm guessing if we took a poll, we would all agree that this moment in the life of the disciples, it wasn't exactly like a 5-star kind of moment. Like if Mark did in fact get his information from Peter, can you imagine that conversation? Mark saying, okay, hey, listen, now let's talk about that storm that night on the Sea of Galilee. Tell me about that. And Mark is writing it down, and then they get to this part. So what did you say when you woke Jesus up? What is it that you guys were thinking? And Peter's having to give this story in light of the end of the story, in light of the ultimate end of the story of Jesus, to say, oh, well, at that point we were thinking, does Jesus care? So is it possible, Mark, can we edit this just a little bit? Like, let me change the question. We don't put in there, does he care? Like, they would have certainly opted to change it in hindsight. But in the moment, it was real. And it was raw. It may not have been what they have scripted, but that's what desperation does. It discloses all those things that we work so hard to disguise. Our fears, the uncertainty of tomorrow that we live with. It discloses the reality of our marriage, the reality of our finances. It discloses our questions, our doubts, all those pieces of us that we work so hard to keep hidden. You could probably think back in your own life to the circumstances that surrounded you the last time you asked the question, don't you care? In fact, what was it that was going on in your world that made you turn your face to heaven or maybe shake your fist at God and shout, don't you care? If so, it's like, well, why this? Why them? Why him? Why her? Why us? Why now? Don't you care it's packed with a million other questions. I still remember being in junior high and sitting in our church one Sunday morning and watching this particular day, a lady named Kathy come down out of the choir loft area and walk to the front of the stage to sing a solo. It was in this time in our service that we termed special music. Did any of you guys grow up in church that had special music where they would, somebody would come up and sing a solo? It was kind of like a random song from a random person. In my, mind as an adolescent, I always thought, how did we end up here? Like, was there a moment where, there was a panel and they said, hey, we're doing this thing. It's kind of taking the church world by storm. We're having people come up and they sing to cassette tapes and then CDs. And it's sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's questionable. But we don't know what to call it. And so they had a few people come up and do it. And maybe the panel just said, wow, that's special. This is what we're calling it, special music. But on this day, I'm telling you, it was remarkable. Kathy came from the choir loft and she walked over to this side of our little bitty stage and she grabbed a microphone and she was going to sing a song. And what everybody in our little church knew about Kathy was that week she had just buried her toddler son as a result of just this horrible tragedy. And so she made the walk from the back of the choir loft up to the front of the stage. Tears already started to mount in our little congregation. And then she got up and she began to sing this song that was written in the early 1900s that was really, it's captured from this very moment of Jesus and his disciples on the Sea of Galilee. The title of this hymn that she sang is, Does Jesus Care? The words go like this. Does Jesus care when my heart is pained too deeply for mirth or song? As the burdens press and the cares distress and the way grows weary and long. Second verse. Does Jesus care when my way is dark with a nameless dread and fear as the daylight fades into deep night shades? Does he care enough to be near? And the verse that I don't think I'll ever forget as long as I live. This mom held the microphone and she sang the final verse. Does Jesus care when I've said goodbye to the dearest on earth to me? When my sad heart aches till it nearly breaks, is it nothing to him? Does he see? There it is. The question that desperation rips the mask right off of. The thing that we can come into a place like this Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and we can pretend it doesn't exist until the hurt of where we are leads us to a place where we can't hide it anymore. It's the question the disciples were asking as they were fighting in what they felt was the final moments of their life. It's the question that Kathy was asking. She sang this song trying to find some kind of category to put what she was living through. And you know what? It's not just her question. It's not just their question. Sometimes it's our question. Does Jesus care? It's not usually the one we want to lead out with in small group, right? As everybody's talking about how good their week is, like, hey, I just want to know, does Jesus care? It's a legitimate question to ask. Hear me. It is a legitimate question to ask. If your circumstances are causing you to wonder, does Jesus care? Then don't be afraid to ask the question. But here's what I want you to know, that question is not a question without an answer. The mom who sang this song that day, that the song answers the question like this. Oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares. His heart is touched with my grief. When the days are weary and the long nights dreary, I know my Savior cares. Jesus answered the question for the disciples by standing up, speaking to the wind and the waves. Peace, be still. In their desperation, Jesus calmed the storm that was around them. And Luke says, Matthew says, Mark says, that the wind and the waves, they ceased. It's the same thing that they had seen Jesus do on so many different occasions and in so many different ways. I could imagine they're there in the boat asking the question, who is this man? And some of it has to do with the fact that, well, when they started the journey, they remembered a demon-possessed man who came to Jesus, and Jesus spoke to him, and they saw the peace that for the first time in a long time came over his life. I bet they remembered that the leper who approached Jesus, his body just being destroyed by the moment, and Jesus spoke to that man, and he brought about a peace in his life too. They remembered the day that a Roman centurion came to Jesus and asked him if he could somehow heal his servant. They remembered what happened next. Maybe they thought about the time that they were walking with Jesus, and as they approached the city gate, they saw a widowed mother going out to bury her dead son, and Jesus approached them. And he spoke life to this son. And the Gospels record that life was restored, not just for one person, but for two people that day, for the mother and the son. So how is it? How is it that in the middle of their storm, they somehow forgot it all? Well, it's the thing that leads us to this second truth about desperation. And that is that desperation often disguises what God declares. Desperation often disguises what God declares. Let's be real. God is good for us when life is good. Money in the bank, kids are on the AB honor roll, everybody that's supposed to be is on the Little League All-Star team. Life is good when God is good. But when the circumstances change, when a little bit of wind and a whole lot of rain starts to hit us in the face, then sometimes, come on, we're prone to question whether or not God is even with us at all. Sometimes if he's even real. I mean, we may never think about it on a normal day. We may never question whether a God who said he would never leave us or forsake us would leave us or forsake us until we reach a place in life where we felt left, lost, and forsaken. But I'm telling you, that's what desperation does. It disguises what God declares. And sometimes that's about the way we see him. And sometimes it has everything to do with the way we think he sees us. Like Matthew records in Matthew chapter 11, that Jesus said, "Come to me. Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I'll give you rest." It's an open invitation. But for us, we think, how do I do that when I've gone anywhere and everywhere else first? How do I do that? And I realize, even as I say that, for some of you sitting in this room right here, right now, this is your first step in that direction. And if you were to tell me your story, it may be because, listen, I am all out of options here. And you know what you want God to do. But after the places you've been, what you've been through, the thoughts and doubts that you have, you're just not, you're not sure if you can expect anything from him. Well, what do we do when what should be our first response has become our last resort? I think this story, what happened in that boat on that night, in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the night, I think it offers a whole lot of clarity to that question. Matthew, Mark, Luke, they all indicate that the disciples did everything they knew to do before they approached Jesus. And when they did, I want you to pay careful attention to not just what happened, but also what didn't happen. Verse 24 says, the disciples went and they woke him saying, Master, we're going to drown. Next verse. He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters, and the storm subsided, and all was calm. He got up and rebuked the wind, not the disciples. He got up and he did something. He didn't just sit up and scold someone. This dynamic in the life of Jesus, it's something that's repeated over and over and over again in the Gospels. In fact, like it's so puzzling to think that Jesus would respond to questions and to doubt and unbelief in that way. That his half-brother, James, he decided he was going to take his best shot at telling us how this dynamic worked. And so in James chapter 4, verse 8, he summed it up like this. He says, come near to God, and he'll come near to you. Come near to God, and he'll come near to you. So what do you do when what should be your first response is your last resort? You come near anyway. You come near. And just see if God doesn't exchange all of your worry and your doubt and your questions for a sense of peace. Come near. Bring it to him. And see if you too don't walk away with an assurance of being able to say, I know he cares. Because in our desperation, sometimes God, he chooses to calm the storm around us. At other times, he simply calms the storm within us. That even though our circumstances don't change, there's something inside of us. Something inside of us that foundationally does. I got to tell you, I had the privilege of seeing this firsthand just a few weeks ago. If you've been hanging out at ACC for a little while, you've probably heard me talk about my friend John Ebby before. John usually attends this service, and he sits about halfway back on this section right here. In fact, like 6 or 7 weeks ago, I had John stand up. He had come with his wife, Vicki, that day, and I had him stand up and just let him know, man, his faith was so encouraging to us. And he's fighting the battle with cancer, but you wouldn't know it if you met John. And so I told him to stand up, and I said, hey, John, I just want you to know we're praying for you, man. We're encouraged, and we're inspired by you. He told me he was a little bit embarrassed by that, but he took it nonetheless. You know, like most Sundays, I like to stand on the front porch and just say hello to you guys when you come in. It's oftentimes one of the only times I really get a chance to do that. And I always feel like if I do it afterwards, then you feel obligated to say something about the sermon or the service. And so I just try to spare you that and just catch you on the front end and hey, and everybody's happy. But I would do that, and I could always spot John when he pulled up in his red truck. I mean, he'd get out, a big smile on his face. Even if he was wearing a mask, he was smiling. I could see it in his eyes. So a few weeks ago, I'm standing out on the front porch. It's good time for the 11 o'clock service to start, and John's he's not here. And so when church ended that day, I got in my truck and I texted John and I said, hey, buddy, I just want you to know, man, I missed seeing you today. Everything okay? He responded back and said, well, I'm back at the hospital again. And he said, Kevin, they're telling me it doesn't look like I'm going to go home this time. And so I went over to see John and Vicki at University Hospital and sat with them for about 90 minutes and just listened to them. They talked about life and their marriage and life of love together and all the memories they had made. We laughed, and then when it became time for me to go, I reached over and I put my hand on John's shoulder and I said, hey, listen, I'm going to see you again. And he smiled real big and he said, oh, you bet you will. And I said, John, look, I'm still asking God to heal you. And he said, Pastor, it's okay. I'm going to be okay. Whatever happens, I'm going to be okay. And a few days later, John went to be with the Lord. He went to be with his God who chose to calm the storm that was within him, even though nothing around him changed. The reason I tell you I had the privilege of seeing that is because I knew John told me with his very own words, that was more than enough for him. I think it's a little bit ironic that this story of this storm, it ends with two questions. Where's your faith? And who is this man? Where's your faith? And who is this man? Because, come on, isn't it true? When we fight a battle with desperation, these are the two things that in some shape or form, they come front and center in our life. Where is your faith? And who is this man? You know what I've learned when I've tried to wrestle with those questions myself? That it usually works best to answer them in reverse. That if you can settle in your heart who Jesus is, then it becomes much easier to discern where your faith lies, or at least where it should lie. And I get it. It sounds amazing on a Sunday morning, but I'm telling you, the next time desperation strikes, you may be at a place where you don't want to answer those questions. Not out loud anyway. And when you're there, I want you to remember, that's what desperation does. That it discloses what we work so hard to disguise, our fears, our emotions, our doubts, our worries. It's what it does. But that's not all that desperation does. Because if you allow it, it'll disguise what God has already declared. The truth that He will never leave us or forsake us. The truth that you can unequivocally come near to Him. And without prerequisite, He will come near to you. The truth that Jesus spoke to His disciples on the night before He went to the cross, is He knew the despair that would bring in their life. He said these words, "In me, you can have peace. In this world, you will have trouble." Just let that sink in for just a second. In this world, you will have trouble. If your approach to God was that it was supposed to be a wrinkle-free, easy-free life, Jesus dispels it right here. In this world, you and I, we will have trouble. But here's the good news. He said, take heart. Take heart. I've overcome the world. Maybe Jesus' way of communicating. That in our desperation, sometimes God changes the storm around us. And sometimes, He simply calms the storm within us. And like my friend John, like that mom, Kathy, I pray that you too will discover that that's more than enough. Would you bow with me? I really struggled with how to even end this message today because I know this is something that gets all of us to some degree. But I know that there are some of you who you walked in this morning. As I mentioned before, the sheer fact that you're here is indicative of your level of desperation, of wanting God to show up and do something in your life. And I just want to close by praying for you. I don't want to embarrass you. I'm not going to ask you to come forward, but if that's you, could I just get you just to look up at me right where you are? I just want to see your eyes for just a second. Yep. Yeah. I see. I see you. I see you. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you. Thank you. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the truth of your word, and the truth that when there are times we do not know what to pray, the Spirit intercedes for us in a way we can't understand. God, I'm seeing the same faces that you see, except for you know the entirety of their story. And so, God, maybe because we can ask, maybe today I just asked, that you would bring a sense of peace and calm to these storms in a way that we can't explain apart from you. That we'll walk out of this place and our flesh kind of tells us that nothing may change. But we know something inside of us can. And I'm asking that it does. God, for some of these situations, things can change. My goodness, I can't imagine that the disciples ever thought it was a possibility for you to speak to wind, water. They have no words, they have no ears, and yet you speak to them and they stop. So God, we know you're the same yesterday, today, and forever. And you can speak into the storm that is swirling around. And you could bring it to a quiet, peaceful, still, where some of these stories can end. All is calm. I ask you to do that. I thank you for men like John Ebby, men who lived this out so we could all see it. I thank you for Jesus, who gives us not just the hope of it, but in the resurrection, the reality of its truth. And I realize that some of you here today, and your storm, the hurt you lived with, has been the thing that's constantly separated you from God. And I just want you to know, it doesn't have to. That your questions, they don't bother him. The fact that he's your last resort does not bother him. The fact that maybe you're like the dad who said, I believe, help my unbelief. It didn't bother him then. It won't bother him now. I just want you to know that you have a chance to call out to a God who loves you, who will save you. And you can do that in your own words, in your own way. Just tell him, today, my last resort has now become my next response. Today, I surrender my life to you. If you do heal and restore and forgive, today I want all of that you have to offer. Today, I give my life to you. Jesus, we thank you for a grace that we'll never understand this side of heaven. For a peace that now we see in part, but one day, we'll see face to face. We thank you for Jesus. Our hope, it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Just stand and join us this morning. Built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love, and through the storm, He is Lord, He's the Lord of hope. In darkness seems to hide His face, I rest on His unchanging grace. Every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within. My anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love, and through the storm, He is Lord, He's the Lord of hope. Yes, Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love, and through the storm, He is the Lord, He's the Lord of hope. He's the Lord of hope. He's the Lord of hope. Sing this out together. When He shall come, when He shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone. Faultless I stand before the throne. Let's proclaim that again together, our hope in Him. When He shall come, He shall come with trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in Him be found. Yeah. Trust in His righteousness alone. Faultless I stand before the throne. Christ alone, corner
I don't know how you came in today, but I hope you leave with the assurance of knowing that you are loved and that God does in fact care. Wherever you are, He loves you and He cares. If you're struggling to find traction for that in your life, I want you to know we'd love to help. There's a lot of ways that could happen, and invite you to stick around. Some of us will stick around after we dismiss in just a minute. But another way that you could do that is through the connection card. This just isn't for first-time guest only, by the way. You'll see some stuff at the top that'll events that'll keep you connected. But on the back, at the bottom, there's a section for prayer. And if you have something going on in your life where you go, hey man, just would you pray for me? If you want us to reach out to you, that's an easy way to do it. You let us know. Give us as much as you're willing to share. Drop it off a connection point, or if you don't want to do that, you can even drop it in the black boxes. We'll get it, and you can rest assured we will pray for you. And if you want to talk, we'd be glad to do that too. Hey, I want to kind of bring this whole thing full circle. I started by telling you about being stuck in traffic on Calabria Road. And next week, we all might be stuck in traffic on Calabria Road because Tally Road is going to be closed down. So here's the deal. I'll just tell you up front, something great is going to happen next week, because next week is Time Change Sunday, where we spring forward. That's always an ouch in church world, because people forget to do that, and then by the time they think of church, it's like, oh, that was an hour ago. So it's time change. They're closing down part of Tally Road. So if you typically come to ACC by way of Petranco, like you come Petranco, turn on to Tally, you're not going to be able to get here that way next week. You'll have to go all the way around and get in that line of cars from Calabria to Old FM 471, or go down to Tally, and you can connect that way and come be a part of ACC next week. I just want you to know that. We're going to throw some stuff on social media to remind you of it. And don't miss next week. Something great is bound to happen with the onset of spring break and time change and a road closure. I can just imagine. Like, we're already swimming upstream. Thank you guys for being here today. I hope you have a fantastic week. God bless you as you leave.